many
event,
years
by
have
the
you
way.
been working on Eventbrite now?
It's been almost 10 years. It will be 10 years at the end of the year.
Wow. And now you've raised around $200 million as of last year.
Exactly, yeah.
And you're worth more than $1 billion, basically.
That's what they say, yeah.
So how do you build the next unicorn now? You asked this question, so...
Yeah, I know. I think things have changed a lot in the last 10 years, so I think it's good to think about what it would take to create the next generation of unicorns. I think we've seen in the last few years a few examples of companies that have reached that valuation very quickly, and you look at Slack, it's been pretty much like a year until they reached that valuation, so that wasn't really heard of. It didn't happen before, except maybe in the .com days, but I think the valuations were completely overinflated at the time. They were not based on any real economic value, whereas the Slacks, the Oculus Rift, or all of these have tremendous potential, and they were able to reach this valuation very quickly. There's a good book, if you haven't read it, it's called Exponential Organizations. It was written by the co-founder of Singularity University in the US. And they've had 160 experts talk to companies in 45 countries, trying to identify what the elements of success in those companies that managed to grow very quickly. And they didn't only talk to startups, they talked to big companies, and the ranking is 100 companies long, and only 35% of these 100 companies are unicorns, or what they call unicorns. So there's also very large companies like Google and others included in that. So they try to really understand the concept of the unicorn, of the exponential growth, resulting in some of the unicorns that we've seen in the last few years, and identify what was the process, what was the causes that made these organizations, or the structural foundation also of how they handle growth, that made it possible for them to grow exponentially. That's where they coined the term exponential organizations. So if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it, because it gives you a lot of insights into what makes these organizations really scalable the way they have been.
So let's go back in time a little bit and think about the very beginning of Eventbrite. What was in Eventbrite's DNA that made it possible to have this kind of exponential growth afterwards?
I think we started with, and the book talks about that, a very simple concept that I see too rarely in the pitches that I get from startups. It's called the massive transformative purpose. So if you start with that and give yourselves a very lofty goal of disrupting an entire industry for us, for example, it was powering the live experiences in the world. So we started very nichely with the small and medium-sized events, and now we're getting pushed into the larger events because the quality of our product have satisfied the needs of the higher end of the market. And we always had that goal in mind, even when we were, and you should look at the site, what it looked like in 2006 when we launched. It was very basic, very Web 1.0 or pre-2000 era. I was the designer on the team, we didn't have a designer. It was very basic, but it fulfilled a need that the market had for tools to help anyone organize events. So it was self-service, was very intuitive, easy to use. Those core principles we've kept all along, and we've also remained very focused on our core market, which is, we started with ticketing, and we're still doing ticketing right now, even though we started to think about all the value chain that happens for event organizers and what they need. We've been very focused on that piece of the puzzle for them. I think these are the few of the principles that help you grow as fast as possible and reach these valuations if you remain core to your initial idea, especially if it's successful. I mean, if it's not, then you should definitely.
So basically, you're saying if you want to do a great startup, you have to have a great idea. Basically, what everyone said you shouldn't think about, like. Is it just the idea?
I think it's the level of ambition that your idea encompasses.
Okay.
I see too many pitches where they're pitching a feature in an app, and that's
so it's the
entire
idea,
ambition is that.
Idea plus ambition plus team
Team is critical. Like once you have identified your...
Well, what can you add to this list? What are all the things that matter? Like the team, the...
Okay, well, there's in the book again, they identify 10 things that are critical. So this massive transformative purpose, that's the first one, I think personally the most important one. Second of all, the founding team, deciding who's going to be on your team. And it's not necessarily your high school friends that you really like to code with.
How did you meet with your co-founders?
I actually met them through a friend of mine who knew that I was a good tech guy, I guess. And Kevin, at the time, was looking at someone to help build the product. So he's very savvy on the business side, the finance side. We started with his wife, or he was his girlfriend at the time. They became husband and wife later. She was much more on the customer marketing side. And I was the tech guy. And I think that created a lot of power in our team. We were each responsible for our core competencies. It helped us divide the work equally and then work together on what we were best at and scale each part of it individually. I started building the engineering team, they started building the finance team, they started building the customer service team. So having that clear definition of roles is pretty important at the beginning, and being complementary probably has a very high correlation to success in the end.
Yeah. How many people are working for Eventbrite today?
We have 500 people in 8 offices in 4 continents.
Okay. How much time did it take to reach, let's say, 50 people?
Well, it took us quite a while. We had to prove that the model was viable, that we had to find our business model, all things that are important as well when you're creating those unicorns. For 2 years, it was mostly the 3 of us. We had a couple of contractors, but that's about it.
Oh, wow.
Until 2011, I think that's when we reached about 50 people. And we've really grown exponentially, I guess, in hiring over the last 2 years. We hired 300 people last year.
So what do you think of these companies now, like consumer companies that raise $50 million, $100 million, and go from 2 or 3 people working on the product to 200 in 6 months? What do you think of them?
Well, some of them are justify their valuation. I think Slack just moved into our building. We had 2 floors that took over the floor below us. And they've a great example of a company that has a mature founding team, and they have the Flickr co-founder who's the main founder of the company. Yeah. So they've had that experience and knowledge and into how you scale the business. And that's not just the tech part. I think the tech part now is much easier than when we started. The cloud is there, all this framework exists. You can tap into a lot of services to do monitoring, A/B testing, analytics, all the things that didn't exist when we started. So then the key is, how do you scale the team? And having experience, knowing who to hire at what time, I think is a critical part in being successful. You can look at Uber, and they're hiring like, I don't know, probably 1,000 people this year. You've got to have the mechanics in place to find those people, to convince them that your project is the best, especially in the valley where the competition is so high. And that takes a lot of knowledge of the market, experience, image branding of your, what the perception of your brand is. How do you become attractive to engineers? All these things you have to plant the seed so that you get the highest quality people on board.
Okay, and do you think you made early mistakes when you started building this team?
Well, it's often the question, what mistakes did we make? I think a lot of things evolved during the 10 years that we've been in business. The social media revolution, the mobile revolution, all the things that we had to adapt and figure out which pieces of these new ways of doing things we were going to incorporate into our product. So Facebook, for example, is a great example. We spent a lot of time, I think it was 2008 or 2009 maybe. I spent about 4 or 5 months integrating directly into the Facebook product. We had a great contact there who said, oh yes, we want you to do the ticketing for Facebook events. So we spent 5 months building almost a replica of the checkout process that we have to be exactly like Facebook, to look like Facebook, to be handling all the payments for events that wanted to charge. And within 2 weeks after launching, Facebook decided that the conversion wasn't high enough on the 0.1% A/B test they did for people who click, do you want to sell tickets through Eventbrite? And we had to kill the project. So we wasted 5 months of very valuable time when you start. But I guess we learned something in the process, and it informed us after that we need to be very conscious of the investment that we put on engineering and product efforts to make sure there's a clear return in the end, and that we can't be dependent on someone else shutting it down.
Third-party platforms, yeah. All right. So maybe what was the point that you were like closest to giving up on Eventbrite, saying, okay, let's shut everything and let's close shop? Because you were working with such a tiny team for so long at the very beginning, it must have been hard, no?
I think when you have success, and we had quite a fairly quick success. I mean, the event space is very different than the social media space. You can scale to 1 billion users on the social media side very quickly, whereas events take 3, 4, 5, 6 months to organize. So there's an inherent slowness into the business processes that happens with events. So keeping that in mind, I think our growth in the beginning was very encouraging and has been encouraging ever since. We're still growing in high double digits, even 10 years after we started, even if we have reached pretty good milestones, $1.5 billion worth of ticket sales last year. So at no point in these 10 years have we thought about quitting. I mean, we can't. We're onto something, I think, that could be very game-changing for the event industry, and not just for the small and medium-sized events that we focused on at the beginning. I think we could be the main ticketer on the planet at some point, but it's going to take 20, 30, 50 years maybe to reach that point.
So you don't think that you've made it already? You think there's still a lot of work to do?
Yeah, I don't think I would be still at the company if I didn't think we had a lot of potential.
Yeah.
And you've got to find the motivation in yourself that excites you still about the prospects that you have. If you feel that you've reached your high point, then the company's valuation is not going to be $1 billion next year. It's going to be 500 million if you start not showing the growth that people expect from your company. So you should not be in the company anymore if you don't have any high expectations for what the future will bring.
Okay. So where do you think the product will evolve beyond like ticketing and creating events? Anyone can create events and stuff like that.
So we've invested a lot in the last year and a half, 2 years on the discovery side, and we'll continue building on that. We want to become the largest global marketplace for live experiences. So that implies making you have the reflex of checking your Eventbrite app before you go out over the weekend. And we're a long way from that, but that's one of our goals, is to become the ubiquitous solution for events, both for organizers, but also for people attending events. And there's a lot of work on that side to be better at recommendations, at data analysis, at understanding who you are and what your interests are, so we can surface the most relevant content to you. It's a bit like advertising. Yeah. We need to find what will make you click and buy. Yeah,
and it will drive sales, of course.
Exactly. And then there's all the peripheral businesses around the event space, at the event experience. That's another area that we're investing in currently. How can we make the experience of being here today a lot better? And there are currently a lot of tools to do that, but we feel we have a unique position because you all, or some of you, have the app installed, and the organizer had the app installed. So there's a lot of communication we can channel through that, having control of the both sides, especially if we enhance the experience by having connected devices in the room, for example, or other ways to engage with each other.
Okay, cool. What do you think about, so I've I've been using Eventbrite for years now, mainly for tech conferences, tech events. I get tickets every week for these conferences. What do you think about startups that focus on selling music tickets, concert tickets and stuff like that? Is it something that you are really interested in, or do you want to be this sort of white label platform for all kind of events?
Well, we never wanted to be white label. We had many opportunities to do that, but we always
it's
felt
pretty
that
neutral right now. I feel like
it's horizontal, it's not
Yeah.
white label.
Yeah.
And we want to continue being the platform that anybody can use, so we'll continue focusing on creating as many features applicable to as many organizers as possible. Having said that, we're also conscious that certain verticals or specialties have very specific needs. The music space, the race space, for example, integration with timers. The classes space, they have repeating events, for example. The theater space. So all these spaces have very specific requirements that we try to first fully understand and then come up with products that are still benefiting other verticals, even if it's not obvious. So reserve seating is a good example, for example, the ability to sell numbered tickets in a room like this. We started thinking it's going to be applicable mostly to like theaters or stadiums.
And sports, maybe.
Sports as well.
Yeah.
And in the end, the first users were fundraisers, for example, that have a room that has tables, numbered tables at different prices. And we had a few presidents use that for fundraising for their campaign.
That's cool.
So it's, if you create a product, I think that with in mind that it should be applicable to a wide variety of events or a wide variety of users, then you open up to unexpected uses of your product.
Yeah.
And we had that from a long time ago because in 2009, for example, the University of Georgetown decided to invite President Obama to speak. He was newly elected. It was 2 months after his inauguration. And they decided to use us to do a lottery to win tickets to go see President Obama. And the entire city of Georgetown rushed onto our site at 9 a.m. on, I think, April 21st, something like that, and crashed our servers. Like, we didn't expect someone to use us as a lottery system. So you learn a lot by how people use your product and trying to boil that down to features or challenges that you can solve in the end helps you grow and mature as a company. Also told us that there were people out there that were willing to sell a very high number of tickets on our platform. We didn't really build the system for that. It wasn't our intended audience at the beginning, but we just had these users come on the platform, didn't tell us at all. They just created the event themselves and sold 100,000 tickets. Like that wasn't in our plans.
But now, like, Eventbrite is used by many events professionals as well, who organize events for a living. Is it still the same motto, like everyone can create an event, or is it now half and half?
No, it's exactly the same tools, whether you're a yoga class with 10 people or a music festival with 60,000 people. So I think that's the power of the platform. You give the same tools to people. The higher end clients get account managers who help them set up the event in the best way. There's a lot of more complicated schemes on the back-end side to pay them out because they have different capital requirements to run their events. But overall, the system is exactly the same, and the features are exactly the same. We built a lot of things for those higher-end events. They have different expectations about the way things should be working and very detailed sometimes feature set that they need. So we've built those and then are not necessarily applicable to a yoga class, but they're there if they want to use them. So we've been very good at trying to bring the power of the platform to everyone if we could.
Okay, cool. Let's go back to the unicorn conversation a bit. Who currently is your favorite unicorn, besides Slack maybe, because apparently you love Slack? But who is your favorite unicorn?
We've been a user of Slack for quite a while.
And beside Eventbrite, of course. I mean,
yeah,
you can tell that you are your own favorite company.
Well, you have the decacorns. I'm a big fan of those. The 10 billion plus. I think everybody sees the value.
You keep creating new terms for bigger companies, but yeah.
I think anyone who creates something that's very ambitious and that changes the game completely, I like personally. And I see that too rarely. I think investors see that too rarely. The level of ambition sometimes is not quite high enough. I'm saying that especially in Europe, where people have maybe a tendency to think that they are not able to compete at the global level, which I think is very wrong. We have very talented people in everywhere in Europe that could create these companies. So it's also a matter of giving yourself freedom to feel like you can disrupt very large industries that will maybe create more unicorns in Europe. There have been quite a few. I think that's a myth that we don't have unicorns in Europe. There was a study recently and they identified 40 companies, I think. It's half what came out of the US, but it's still a very high number. Yeah. France is not so well represented in that list, so I hope we'll get a lot more. But yeah, I think anyone who's ambitious and wants to change the game, I'm totally behind. I think we need more of this. There's so many inefficiencies in the world, and so many verticals to disrupt. And you look at health, you look at the way we treat all people. And there's so many business models to be created to make things better for humanity in general.
Okay, cool. That's very poetic of you, but okay. Who is your favorite French company? Who has the best chance of becoming a unicorn in your mind, besides Crédit, which is already a unicorn?
That's a good question. I haven't thought about that one. I don't know.
Okay, cool. So do you think, let's talk a bit about French startups, because you brought the subject. Do you think it's a good idea to move to the US early on and to leave France behind, or do you think you can build a good company in France today?
Well, I think that's changing as well. Where companies are based doesn't mean that all their team is based in the same place. So I see a lot of French companies establishing their presence in the US, having a US entity own the French entity or some other arrangement like that allows them to benefit from the quality of the engineers here, for example, have their R&D centers, take advantage of all the credits that we get to set that up here, and then still be present in the US and seen as a US company, but with all the benefits of having lower cost teams in Europe. I think that's a great model. You get access to capital that you wouldn't have access to if you didn't have the US entity. You get higher valuations. You get access to the US market, which is, I think, easier to expand fast in versus Europe, which is very fragmented, has different rules everywhere. So if you can leverage the funding that's available in the US and also keep your team here, I think that's a great model. And Algolia, for example, has done that very successfully. They went to Y Combinator. One of their founders is still in the US. It's incorporated in the US, and they raised money from Excel as a result of all the momentum they've had in the US mostly. But the team is here.
Yeah, that's true. So you have offices in Dublin, London, and Berlin. How hard it is to work with offices so far away from San Francisco?
So I think the hardest is going from one office to two, because everything that you did locally, all the meetings that you had, all the communication that only happened when everybody was in the room doesn't work anymore. So you have to implement different ways of talking to your employees, feeling the pulse of the remote team, making sure everything is streamed so that they have access to the content. The first office we opened outside of San Francisco was London, so 8 hours ahead of San Francisco. And a lot of the meetings that we had, all hands, for example, where the company gathers and hears from management what we're working on, what the results are, was at 5 p.m. in San Francisco, which didn't work for London. It was midnight. So we had to change a lot of things like that and adapt, and then all the other remote offices after that benefited from that first effort. We also had to think, how do we translate the culture from a very American way of being entertaining and being a fun company, adapted that to the UK market, which is slightly different, a bit more skeptical.
How different it is? Don't they like to have fun as well?
No, they do, but there's no like huge clapping all the time and high fives, and that's very American and doesn't necessarily translate so well with the Europe in general and the UK in particular.
So it's polite, hot tips, and
yeah, it's
and
a bit
let's drink
formality
a bit of
as
tea
well in the relationships. So thinking about how do we translate our culture was a big part of making that a successful story in the end.
Do you have company retreats where all the company come together?
Never.
Okay, why?
I don't know. We've been very frugal, I think, in the way we've decided to spend money. We have a lot of offsites for the teams so that they can get to know each other better, but we've never done, and in the early days we did when we were 10, 15 people, but then it's becoming a huge expense when you have 500 people to bring to one location, and we have people from Australia to South America. Yeah. So how do you find the obvious reason to do it, which hasn't been clear to us, what value you get from that?
I mean, most companies who do that and tell it to me, they say that it's to bring some sort of unique culture, one company, one team. And
we do a lot of cross-office movements, so we have a lot of engineers coming from Argentina, going to San Francisco, London, marketers getting together somewhere in the middle. So it's more of a functional basis to create the relationships that they need to work on stuff together every day that we're trying to foster versus the big party on a beach somewhere where everybody gets drunk. I don't know if that's the right way.
What do you think is the best thing in Eventbrite's company culture today?
I think it's being very open, transparent about what we're trying to do, how we're going to go about it, making people feel important. I think they're all there because they want to have an impact in the company, and giving them clear responsibilities, clear objectives, and creating the tie between their own objectives and the company objectives so that they can measure what kind of impact they're having on the organization overall. I think is critical in motivating people in general and at startups in particular. Engineers, for example, they want to know that they're going to be working on some of the most important projects for the company, and that if they do that well, it's going to open up a new market for the company potentially. And that's the type of challenges people are looking for in those startups.
Okay, cool. Maybe one last question. So do you think it has become more competitive to build a unicorn today than let's say 5 years ago?
So I think it's become faster for the ones that find the right purpose.
Okay.
But people's expectations are much higher today than they were 10 years ago. We might not have been successful with the product we launched in 2006 if we launched it today.
That was my follow-up question. But
expectations on design, on UX, on functionality. I mean, the mobile generation kills your app within 10 seconds if it doesn't bring them value within those 10 seconds. So you have to think very differently about the products you're creating. Even if you have a lofty goal, be very conscious of the changes in what people expect of a product in general and how it should work.
Okay, do you think you would have worked in silent mode for 2 years on the product before showing it to the world?
No, I still believe that getting exposure, getting usage so that you can measure whether you're on the right track or not. I mean, the whole lean startup methodology, I think, is still very applicable. Okay. You might need to wait a bit longer to create your MVP. I think it's took 18 months before they launched. But then they had a very complete product already. They knew they had to be on all the platforms, on desktop, on mobile. So that gave them a big leg up on the competition by having this time to really fine-tune their product and work with beta testers to make it very valuable in the end when they launched.
Okay, one last thing. How does it feel to be called some kind of mythological animal that doesn't exist? And
Yeah, it kind of kills the magic of the unicorn.
do you like the term unicorn? I don't, so.
Yeah, I think it's people like to have rankings and barriers, and
it's a good
so
way
they've
to rank,
found
yeah.
this term that is mythological, but I think it excites people that they can think that it actually exists. So maybe putting a name to some lofty goal that excites people might be a good thing.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.